Welcome to this episode of How We Made That App. I'm your host, Madhukar Kumar. I started off my career as a developer, eventually got into product management, and then finally into marketing. Today, I have with me Premal Shah. He's the co founder as well as the head of engineering for a company called 6Sense, a company that helps marketers with better data and better segmentation. Welcome to the show, Premal. I know we have been talking quite a lot, and you're one of my favorite customers, our favorite customers. But I always look forward to the conversations because I just love to learn about what your company is doing, what your engineering team is doing, given the background. So I wanted to start off with a little bit. Tell our audience your background. How did you get into engineering? Where did you start? How did you eventually get to Six Sense?
I was born in India and in Bombay, and my dad was has a business which was helping the banks do a lot of the reconciliation of their spend, and he had a lot of computers, and this is like in the 80s. So I got into just playing around and building computers early on, and that passion kept growing into software engineering. Learned all the different languages, and eventually went to school for computer science in
Wow.
India, and then I moved to the US. Was doing a bit of software like computer networking and computer science, and eventually uh, found my passion building software, websites, and like large scale systems. And yeah, the rest.
I was with some students last week at UC Santa Barbara. I was just blown away by the kind of stuff that they're doing now in the university. I remember when I did my master's in software engineering, we were just told, okay, here are the big concepts, right? But we didn't really get into the hands on programming till we were in like a Java 101 class. And then we built out a calculator. And today, now I look at kids and they are building stuff like this team I was working with. They have this racing car and they have these sensors, and they're using the data from those sensors using MQTT and then putting that data into uh, our database single store and then building application. What was your experience like in the engineering school? Did you get to see a lot of hands-on stuff, or was it mostly about the principles? Like I remember even the database class that I had was purely just principles and algorithms, nothing to do with real databases.
So we actually got a lot of practical experience while in the school projects. There was a whole web development class where we actually had to like design and have a running website with a database attached to it. And in fact, even in like India, when we were in school, the final year project, we actually built a whole like appointment system. So uh, properly working, at that point, ASP.NET or whatever
Yeah.
those things, but ASP. And then database classes, we did special databases, hierarchical databases. We had to build a whole application with Google Maps and like find the nearest, restaurant and stuff like that. So it was, uh, you know, definitely pretty interesting, and uh, you would get a lot of practical experience when find your own bugs and solve real problems.
What was the database at that time? I remember when I started working, the first job, it was a SQL Server database, which was commercial. But I don't remember, for me at least, that there was an open source database like MySQL at that time. Do you remember where you started off with?
Yeah, I think this was like we used to play around with MySQL. I think when you're in college, especially in the US, you probably get like licenses to Oracle, like the the skinny versions and um, whatever features they have. It's probably my memory. We weren't too much into Postgres, but yeah.
Yeah, I remember like even with Oracle, they used to come in CDs.
Mhm.
And first you install Red Hat, the open source version. Then you install the database. And then when you write up the application that picked up the data and showed it in rows and column was like such a magical experience.
Yeah.
How's that changed? Like, what do you feel about it now? When, if you were to start over and if you were to do things all over again, but today, like, what would you choose to start off with?
Yeah, I mean, I really love MySQL. It's just, easy to get started locally, and there are so many commercial and like even AWS has so much support for it. You start off with that. Especially when you're doing more like a small size transactional database, doing your POCs. A lot of people love Postgres. My flavor is MySQL. Start off with like a Python based web framework, or if you're doing something very API heavy, then maybe something like a drop wizard in Java. And yeah, I mean, start with like simple HTML stuff and then make it more complex as time goes. I've spent a lot of my career like optimizing things in MySQL and like really comfortable doing that. And when you go to the very large parallel databases, then that's where you have to like do the right research as to what you can get your hands on as fast as possible.
Yeah, I remember like with MySQL, I used to work for a company called Optimost. Was acquired by Interwoven, where I worked with. And Optimost was one of the original web analytics company. And we used to get all that data into MySQL.
Hmm.
And there was a team of 5 people in New York, if I remember correctly. They were just there to optimize MySQL because as it got bigger and bigger, you had to do partitions, you
Hmm.
had to do sharding, then you had to do clustering, then you had to do DR. I'm talking about like at least 14, 15 years ago. And it was like a massive rocket science operation of trying to manage the data and make sure it never, you don't lose the data, but also run analytics. But before we go further down that path, tell me or tell our audience what is 6Sense? That's the company that you co founded. And what does it do? Who do you sell it to? What is it used for?
We started in 2013. The original mission
Mhm.
was, we are predictive analytics for B2B sales and marketing. And the problem we were solving is allowing uh, people, who are selling and people who are marketing to understand who is actually interested in buying their product at that time. So whenever you are doing outreach, it is not cold. Somebody is researching your product. Somebody wants to buy something um, that you are selling, and that helps you cut down on time, effort, money, etc. to open pipeline, and eventually, it's as you have a great product, you're going to make the sale. So that was whole premise behind the idea. Our fundamentals have not changed. The only way we deliver the product, what kind of like different activation channels that we provide has changed over the years. We do, we help you do advertising, we help you do email, help you hyper personalize email, help you do, social channels like LinkedIn, Google, Meta, and help the salespeople really dig into what their accounts have been doing so that whenever they're having a conversation, they can tailor it correctly and exactly figure out like, are the prospects looking at their competitors? How many times have they been to my website? What kind of high value pages are they seeing? What are the other research they're doing across the internet? So we are now a big, you know, intent data provider where we get millions of like uh, website visits from different high value publishers every day that we collate and we show it in a single pane of glass to our customers, whether you're a marketer or a seller.
That scale just is mind boggling, at least to me, because we use at single store, we use 6Sense as well. It's one of our favorite products. And we use it to, basically do our go to market. So we figure out our ideal customer profile, then we use 6Sense to enrich that data, and then we have a very targeted campaigns going. But tell me, or tell our audience a little bit about how you started the app. Like when you thought about the idea, I'm assuming you were sitting in front of the computer and thinking, okay, what database should I have? What should be the architecture? Is this something that I'm going to And I'm sure at that time there was no Kubernetes, there was no
Mhm.
cloud. So tell me a little bit about your thinking process.
Yeah. We were very fortunate to have signed up one of Fortune 500 companies in the very beginning. So we had a very decent scale of data coming into the system on a daily basis.
And you
And
were collecting the data directly through third party, or how was the data?
so in the beginning, we had an FTP server. The customer used to constantly on an hourly basis
They
drop
would upload the data.
yeah drop their website visitor logs to us. And think about the time in 2006, 7, 8 where Hadoop like really came up to say, hey, you are collecting so much data for yourself that you're not able to process it in a
Mhm.
single threaded environment. Now this is a parallel processing system. We had to basically build a platform that would get all of our customers' data on a daily basis or hourly basis and like process it every day and give them insights on top of it. So we had some experience with Hadoop and at that time. So we used that platform as like our big data platform, and then we used MySQL as our metadata layer to store things like who is the customer, what products are they, who are the users, etc. So there was a clear separation of small data and big data in the platform. And then we had a bunch of data processing frameworks set up. Initially, we started off with everybody wants to run cron jobs, right? So we had like we had a server where we were running cron jobs, and then we were like, oh, Mesos has come up, and they have Chronos, which is used for cron jobs. So we set up Chronos, and it was great. And then there was another system called Marathon, I think, in Mesos, which we
Yeah, I
used to
remember that.
use to run long-running jobs and in a particular sequence. And then we have a concept of a DAG, which is like a directed acyclical graph. So when we get our customers' data, we have to process their web data, their CRM data, marketing automation, combine it, and then derive some insights. So internally, there's a graph created from it, and then I think initially we used think one of those Mesos frameworks to build it, and then we actually built an in-house framework like an Airflow. And obviously, over the years, right, as you said, Mesos had died, but Kubernetes has come up as like um, the de facto container orchestration system. So we migrated to it several years ago. Our web services are running on it. Our whole DAG framework is running on it. We have hundreds of cron jobs, long running jobs. So we run like about 2 million containers a day, like
Oh, wow.
doing all the processing across our customers. As a customer is onboarded, the DAG gets created, all their data gets collected on a daily basis, processed. Everybody gets their own mini DAG that gets run through the system. So we have a lot of data and a lot of processing now, and totally on AWS, so leveraging most of their infrastructure, and running our Hadoop frameworks, our Kubernetes cluster on top of
When you say 2 million containers, I cannot even imagine
it.
how many EC2s or how many virtual machines you're running. But let's go back to the original, because I kind of love how all of this started and how where it is today in this massive scale. So the whole idea was, if I'm a customer, I take my data, and I remember FTP. Boy, there used to be CyberDuck, I remember, on Mac, which was a much later product, but it allowed you to, FTP your data. And that's how I would share files even with myself for a very long time. And then there was FileZilla and whatnot. It's interesting that now with the likes of S3, but also a bunch of other new technologies that came about, we didn't realize that FTP actually died. I don't know if anybody still uses FTP, but I remember there was a time where that was the only way that you could send files, very large files, over to different companies. And then there's, of course, SSL, another secure way of sending files. So in your case, companies would FTP their data periodically, I'm assuming a lot of manual work. And then the cron jobs would process that data. And then the output would be also data that goes back into an FTP folder for the customers. Is that how it started off as?
Yeah, so as you said, in the very beginning, people, the large companies, they used to just dump their data on a regular basis. But then we build our like web tag collection system. So now we have a JavaScript tag sitting on their website. Data is continuously streaming in, secure and all. Then we do all that processing, right? So we have to really understand, okay, the day is done. Now we need to process yesterday's data. Some of it we do in real time, some we do in batch. And then there are multiple ways of delivering, right? We have our own product. You can log in, you can see the data. We push the intelligence back into your CRM, where your sellers are living. We push it back to your marketing automation so you can run campaigns of it. There are certain customers who want to do more BI, analytics on top of data. So we push them some raw data back to their FTP, to their secure servers. So that depending on what a customer wants, there are several delivery mechanisms for the data.
What was it like to go from your own servers to then to cloud, and then eventually to containers and Kubernetes? Like, how long did it take you to do that migration?
Pretty much from the beginning, the only non-cloud stuff we were doing was local development. This is like 2013. We each bought like a computer from like, or we built it sitting under like a desktop sitting
Yeah.
under the desk and a monitor, and we were building stuff, and we had like a local network setup, so everybody's computer was part of the Hadoop distributed file system for testing locally. But most of our everything actually we were running was in AWS cloud from the very beginning.
Oh, okay. Wow.
We were in Y Combinator, so we got a lot of credits to get started with AWS. So did not have to spend out of company's pocket at that time. And obviously it's just like setting up EC2 instances and like running your scripts on top of it, and all the old school DevOps work that I used to do. And then with Ansible automation and like now the new ways of setting up servers. Obviously Kubernetes has made things really easy to set up, and we have many of those clusters running. Transformation to Kubernetes was about 5 years ago, where it was still early, so we had to learn a lot, and I'm sure their APIs are still changing, but it was still a coming from that Mesos world, knowing that hey, this system works, going to a much stable,
Mhm.
widely adopted container orchestration system was always on our mind, and we have made that leap. Actually, we don't have Mesos running anymore, and we have many clusters of Kubernetes running. We are investing a lot in like scaling and going up and down and saving money and between spot and on demand. So now that's what we invest time in, and without worrying about how to run containers.
Got it. And, eventually, of course, I'd love to hear about how things are changing and what are you doing to prepare your team for, whatever's happening with GenAI and stuff. But in general, did you go from a monolithic architecture to microservices based, or were you always kind of disaggregated and containerized friendly to begin with?
Obviously, in the very beginning, we had like 2 or 3 services only, right? And
Mm.
we had stuff running on EC2, and we had some deployment scripts which would like package the artifacts, ship it, and deploy it. But pretty soon we realized that hey, the world is moving to microservices. Uh, we need to make it easy for our developers to build and deploy stuff in the microservice environment. So, you know, we started investing in containerization and figuring out, uh, how we could deploy it. And at that same time, like Kubernetes was coming in. So with using Docker and Kubernetes, we were able to now blow up our monolith into microservices, and a
Mhm.
lot of them. And now each team is responsible for their own service and scaling and managing and like building and deploying the service. So the confluence of technologies and like what you can foresee as being your challenges really help in like making the transition to microservices.
That's one thing I'd love to understand. Like, I remember when I was much closer to product development, at least when we were shipping products outside of cloud. it used to be a back-end team, and then there's a front-end team. And then there's, of course, the front-end team had the design team and so on. How do you, first of all, how big is the engineering team? Are you able to share?
We have about 200 engineers.
200.
Yeah.
So how do you organize a team like that? Is that around feature set? Is that around what exists in the product today? Like, how do you think about organizing your team so that they're all working like a microservice, right? Where they do their own modular
Mm-hmm.
stuff, but they all eventually connect at some point.
Yeah.
How do you think about the organization stuff?
Yeah, so we kind of largely divide the teams into like a platform team and like an application team. Uh,
I see.
so platform teams are responsible for building the common frameworks that everybody would use, doing the build and release stuff, building the API frameworks and security frameworks and logging framework, and all that stuff happens on the platform layer. And they are obviously taking requirements from the developers who are working on the applications that are customer facing to make sure that they are not repeating the cycle on over and over again. So then they can just start a service and then they get all the scaffolding built in. And the vertical teams or the application teams are divided into the various products that we sell.
Mhm.
Uh, so we are largely we are like persona based. So we have a marketing focused product, we have a sales focused product, we have operations focused product. So kind of like split them into those pillars right now.
And they also have domain experience, or do they have experience on a certain part of the product?
Yeah, so obviously before joining 6Sense, a lot of people don't have any
Sure.
sales or marketing
Yeah.
experience as a developer. But once they come in, they are like mostly working on their area. Obviously, we try to rotate people too, so that they are like getting some variety across products and services. But yeah, even with the marketing, we have like sub areas. There's like advertising, there's like email, there's reporting analytics. So people spend a lot of time like going deep into their area before they move on to something.
And typically, when you have a platform team, are they the one also responsible for let's say the data aspect of it? Because I'm assuming the data aspect is pretty big. Like, are you able to share what's the size of data that gets generated or processed on a daily basis or a monthly basis?
I would approximate it to like probably like few hundred or maybe like 100 terabytes of data that we move around on a daily basis.
Oh, wow.
We probably get like a few terabytes coming in, and then we process it, and then we make derive different signals from it, so that like blows it up. So yeah, it's a lot of data. Obviously, not we don't keep everything, but we generate a lot, and then we discard a bunch of it.
And is that also disaggregated across the different teams, or is it platform team that says, no, the data aspect is entirely on the platform side and here are a bunch of governance and access rules? Or am I thinking about it differently?
Yeah, so the platform team, including the big data team, is responsible for making sure we have a healthy environment that people can run their jobs on,
Mhm.
right? And then the individual application teams or even people from some platform teams can write their jobs and make it part of the DAG that I was earlier telling you about. So they're like, oh, I'm already writing this signal, I need to do something additional on top of it, so they can either update it or they can add a new job and make it part of the pipeline. Um, so it is the platform team is mainly responsible for making sure we have a stable and secure platform, and then people can build on top.
And so if you're doing 100 terabytes a day, do you also have some like at any given point of time you have like 8, 10, 100 petabytes of data? And I'm assuming you continue to archive stuff as
Yeah.
well, or sunset them, whatever you call it. So what's the total sizes?
Yeah, we have like probably 10 to 15 petabytes of data sitting in like
Um,
storage like S3 and HDFS combined. Yeah.
And so if you were to categorize that data, like the 10, 12 petabytes of data, would you say most of them are structured or unstructured or fast moving or slow moving? Like, do you think about data in that way, or do you think of it more from an application perspective? Like, I don't really care. My application need is to get this data, and I need it in a few milliseconds or whatever.
Yeah, so we pretty much, I would say it's like mostly structured data. We convert it to structured. So once we get it in different forms from our partners and customers, everything is like a Hive table, right?
I see.
Kind of. So then you should be able to query it, you should be able to join it to anything else and derive some signals on top.
Wow. So most of the data is in structured, and you said it's in Hive table.
Hmm.
So I'm assuming, do you still use MySQL or?
Oh, we absolutely use MySQL. As I said, it's like our what we call a small data ecosystem is MySQL, right? So um, all our customers' metadata is sitting in there. All the job metadata is sitting in there. So we still have a decently sized MySQL to run the metadata layer, but all this data is sitting in the big data is sitting in like Hive.
Got it. So majority of the data is in Hive, some in MySQL. I know you have single store as well.
Hmm.
Where does that fit in? Like, how do you think of the data architecture today versus in the future? And why have multiple databases, so to speak? Like Hive, I kind of get it. MySQL, I also kind of get it, more transactional use cases, like more writes. And then, of course, single store. Would love to hear more how you're using it. But tell me a little bit about the data architecture landscape and how do you think about it from the end user's perspective?
One way to consume data from 6Sense is go to our UI,
Mhm.
and you're a marketer, salesperson, operation. There are different UIs you can get in and uh, do different things like create campaigns or
Mm.
like create a segment of accounts, a segment of people, or get some details about an account or all the accounts that you own, right?
And that's like a joint statement from a bunch of different tables under the hood, in a
Exactly
way.
right. Now, we want to make that experience really fast for someone to come in the UI and like get the data out. So, uh, traditionally, we have figured out the right purpose built databases for different use cases. So, we have Presto slash Trino clusters running that can do the fast querying of data between not only data just sitting in Hive itself or sitting in S3 along with HDFS, but also maybe do a join to MySQL at the same time and return that output to our customer. We have There are certain UIs where we want to be like even faster, where there is not a scope of a lot of exploration. It is like pre-canned in many ways, like the
Mhm.
data. So we put an edge base there. We said, okay, you have to do a lot of like data engineering to say, okay, this is how the customer is going to access it. This is how our API is going to access it. So let us store the data this way, so it is as fast as possible. So we had those two ecosystems where if you had exploratory data, we would like put you on like the Presto's layer if it was more canned, like the edge-based layer. But you could see that there was like data fragmentation. The same data was sitting in two different places. And if you update it in one place, you have to make sure you update in the second place. So that's where, we brought in like single store to say, let's just move all our UIs to one data lake, and everybody gets a consistent view. There's only one copy. So we process everything on our Hive and Spark ecosystem, and then we take the subset of the processed data, move it to single store, and that's the customer's access point.
I see. And when you say move the data, is it some sort of an ETL job that's running
Yes.
outside the databases, pulling the data, doing something with it, and then sending it over to single store? Or is it like a pipeline inside of single store that is pulling the data and doing some transformations on the fly?
Our Hive and Spark system are processing data. They're combining data sets. They are deriving signals, and once it's put into like a final table in the Hive ecosystem, we ETL it into single store using pipelines or load data, whatever is best for that particular source. So we have like again hundreds of tables in single store that we are pulling data into from different tables in Hive.
And what was the reason for single store versus doing all of this in MySQL or Presto as the front layer to MySQL and Hive?
Presto is great for doing exploration, but if you want like the sub 100 millisecond response times for like complex queries, it definitely does not perform as well. There are concurrency issues. You need a lot more hardware to get that really fast response times. MySQL cannot store the amount of data that we output, that's why we had the Hive layer to store table. If we were to build those really fast UIs, like we did for HBase, we were not able to do it with Presto. That's why we had HBase going in.
Mm-hmm.
So it just did not work for the right use case. So that's why we wanted to get something else that would work.
So knowing, actually, I have two questions. One I'm very curious about because of my own personal experience. Let's go with that. So if I'm building an application today from scratch, right? I choose MySQL or I choose Postgres. Let's first, for this example, let's say I use MySQL. At what point do I start to think about how much data should it be storing, or what's kind of the point where I need to think about, okay, I need something else? Like, what are some of those triggers that go through my mind to say I have outgrown MySQL?
One is if you are a multi-tenant environment, right, and you are pulling a lot of data from your customers.
So I have multiple customers accessing their parts of the data.
Yeah, exactly. And you would have customers with different sizes of data, and you can't really like provision the right capacity all the time because you don't know how customers' data is going to change, how much is going to improve, especially when you want to store a lot of historical data and you want the customers to be able to do historical analysis on the top of the data, or even internally you want to do it, right? MySQL is great for doing like few million, 100 million writes a day. But if you want to do like billions of rows of insertion and be able to query it really fast, you're going to run into troubles. And as you said earlier, you do partitioning and sharding and this and that. And that's a lot of overhead. I know Facebook, where you were mentioning some company you were working at, Facebook had hired like some MySQL guru to,
Yeah.
build out a very complex MySQL environment and make source code changes to MySQL, right? So it's very evident that you are not going to be able to scale your business if you're storing the raw data.
So, second part of the question, let's say knowing what you know, everything today, if you were to, let's say, build 6Sense today, how would you choose your data architecture? Like,
I would not change a lot, right? Our Hive and Spark ecosystem is pretty strong. We are very happy with it. Obviously, we are upgrading it to the latest versions. They have their own strengths and weaknesses between Hive and Spark. We love both of them. We have had experience. They are great for doing like the big data like manipulation and like processing. We even do machine learning through it, so it's very versatile. We have written a lot of like custom functions to process it during the processing, right? Like you can add a MySQL function to say normalize a string. That's very simple thing that we've written in Hive, but we've also done very complex things that are possible in that ecosystem. A MySQL still stays because we still need to store the metadata and keep it fast moving and do those small inserts. There's also a lot evolving in the Hive ecosystem in terms of like the file formats. So we'll probably go to some Delta file format like Hoodie, or there's another one that is skipping my mind, where we can actually make like little changes to files after we write them, which is not available in the traditional Hive or like a Parquet or ORC system. So that is definitely going to be a big data system, whether we run it in house or on some cloud, where we do run on a cloud, but whether we run it directly on EC2 or Kubernetes environment or EMR. That is something we would like again look at and figure out what is the most cost effective, less maintenance for us. Then I would still figure out what is the best database for a customer to interact with the solution and how much interaction they need.
and which one, in your experience, works for most of the requirements?
Yeah, so we have extensively tested single store for a lot of our use cases, and when we were doing the research and we were in the POC phase, we were working with two other vendors, maybe three other vendors, and everybody had their own strengths and weaknesses. Single store obviously stood out because of the each step capabilities. We can do a MySQL within single store and not need a MySQL. We are not there yet personally because it takes time to get there, but we definitely found it great for running like large scale analytical queries on top of the data and still return it in a transactional like time period, right? We can do very complex things. We can architect the data the right way, and we can achieve the right results, which are not possible with a lot of the traditional systems.
So, kind of a newbie question because I'm not very familiar with Spark. So, Hive, I get it. It's like at a very abstract level, it's like a SQL table. So, I can run SQL
Correct.
queries, right? But under the hood, it's like an HDFS
Yeah, it's like a file,
file
right?
system.
It can be a
Yeah,
CSV file, whatever, and you can still treat it like a SQL, like a table.
that's beautiful. So,
Yeah.
I have a very large set of data sitting in a file system ish, and I'm running SQL off of that, which is where Hive is. Spark, can you explain it to me? What does it do? What do you use it for? Is it like a cron job but in Java, or is it more like an end-to-end application that pulls the data, does something, and then deposits somewhere else?
There are a lot of similarities between Spark and Hive, and they actually work off the same metadata, right? So when you create a Hive table, there is a Hive meta store which tells it what are the columns and what are the data types, etc.
Um,
So Hive is kind of an execution engine on top of your files. Spark is a complementary execution engine. Now you can, write Spark SQL just
mhm.
like you write Hive SQL, and they are pretty much compatible with each other with minor changes. Or you can actually write Python or Java code in Spark and treat your files as data frames, and you can do the similar operation. So with Spark, when you write code, you can now write unit tests, and you can write like other stuff around it that makes it easier to understand and maintain and improve and test. Or you can use Spark SQL. So there are options with Spark, and there are multiple languages you can write code in. But basically, the it does the same thing as Hive in some way. It runs execution on top of one or multiple tables and creates an output on top.
Got it. So what I really like about what you just said is like I can use Python and similar to pandas, I can create data frame, but there is where I use Spark.
Hmm.
And the syntax for getting that data is through SQL, right? Which is coming in through Spark framework itself, or I could choose the Hive.
Yeah, I mean, if you write Python code, you can just say, "Hey, here's a Hive table and now load it in a data frame. Here's another Hive table, load in a data frame, join it based on this column,
I
do
see.
this kind of aggregate, do this kind of operation, and write it back to this like new table." And you can write that in like Python.
Okay, makes sense. Let's talk a little bit about the deployment side, right? Because I think what you just said blew my mind in terms of 100 million containers. I'm still thinking about it. How do you do deployments then, or how do you do releases? Like, do you get a feature from a certain team and it's now in production as soon as somebody does a PR and it gets committed and it's get approved, and then your customers have that feature? Or do you say, no, I'm going to have another replication of my entire environment somewhere else, and then I have questions about what about that 6 or 10 petabytes of data, and then you accumulate all your releases and then in a standard way then move it into production? Like, how do you think about deployment in this such a massive scale?
Yeah, so developers start off with their own local development, right? And they create like feature branches. Then once a bunch of developers on the same team have like things ready to test in like a dev environment, then they create like a special branch which builds like containers for their services automatically, and then they deploy to that branch where bunch of testing happens, QA is spending its time, and now like once a month it's release time, right? And at that point, we cut a release branch code gets merged into it, and tested again. Automation and all that stuff is happening, and then it gets merged into the trunk. Containers get built, and now developers do the deployments. There are also cases where there are auto deploys happening for our pipelines and stuff. But generally, we are just deploying on top of Kubernetes, and there are like rollbacks and all those things available. Um, but we generally coordinate our releases around a particular time of the month, especially for like the big features. Things go behind feature flags, so not every customer immediately gets it. Some things go in beta, some things go in like direct to production. So there are different phases for different features. You asked about data, so we don't have everybody's data in the dev environment. So a lot of it is also creating synthetic data and like testing it with different scenarios. And then we have our own data, so we can use that as a guinea pig. And then we have like test environments that we have set up, so we can simulate as much as possible for the different integrations. Somebody has Salesforce, somebody has Marketo, Eloqua, HubSpot. All those environments can be like tested.
So when I think about millions of containers, to me, it's like almost like a beehive where you are maybe standing 100 feet away and looking at the whole thing. Do you have some sort of a thing like that where you say, okay, these are all my containers, there's an issue here, or something seems to be going off over here, let's go look at it? Like, is it like that, or is it a very different way of looking at where to look at the issues, how to, and then assign it to the right engineer and get that fixed?
Yeah. So observability is the key, right? If you cannot see what's happening, you cannot like fix it, you cannot understand what's going on. Um, we do have multiple Kubernetes clusters, but the web service cluster is not millions of containers. It's like few hundred, right? Each service has multiple replicas. We use a bunch of tools like Datadog and other logging services, so we can have visibility, and we have a lot of like alerts and like triggers set up for things that are happening, pages going off, and we should be able to trace back exactly to where the problem is happening, who is responsible for it, page the right team, right escalation paths. um, we should be able to see the metrics. Is it a container level issue, is it a database issue, um, code issue, whatever it is, and trace it back to the line of code.
So switching gears a little bit now, I'm thinking a little bit like a marketer or go-to-market person, and we talk a lot about, hey, if you are a technology company, let's say a lot of the tech startups are technology companies, and they end up selling to other technology company like yours. How does the decision making happen around what you end up buying, right? So, for example, I remember when I was doing this stuff. By the time I'd left, it was about, okay, let me just go give it a try on my own. So I go look for a free trial, I try it, and if it works, I quickly build my own prototype. And the next sprint, I go show it to my manager or the product manager. And then we say, okay, now we think it's the right solution. Let's go talk to the sales team or something like that. Is that kind of sort of how it works in large engineering teams, or is the buying process or evaluation completely different? Like how does that machine work?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I can speak to how we do stuff at 6Sense, because with the advent of like all the privacy regulations and compliance and myriad of like things that have propped up in the last several years, it's very important for our legal and security teams to understand what data is being sent where, especially when you are using a SaaS platform, right?
Mhm.
Are you sending any customer data,
PII.
any PII, or even customer names or IDs, or like email addresses of your users, or anything? If you are sending to a vendor that you're using, that comes under heavy scrutiny. So we always have a gate, even for doing POCs, to first get the right people involved to understand how are we going to use the product in terms of the safety and privacy of the data. And then it is about the scale and the cost, and like there are obviously build versus buy conversations.
Mm.
And if this is going to scale with the number of customers, it's going to scale with number of engineers, it's going to scale with uh, number of EC2 instances or Kubernetes clusters. There are various different pricing models, right? Everybody has. So all those go into consideration. Obviously, we talk to vendors, we understand, we know our pain points, we try to find two or three that we can do POCs with, make sure legal and privacy is aligned. Then we do the POCs, and then the contracting process starts.
So is that you and the leadership team that decides that, okay, this is the direction we are headed, now let's go and do the evaluation? Or is it more ground up user developer up where they try it out? Or where is that
Yeah,
mix?
it is mostly a strategic direction for the engineering team saying, hey, these are the problems we want to solve, and let's go and find some solutions. And some people are given the charter to go and find them.
Got it.
Sometimes developers will come with great ideas to say, hey, I use this personal tool, but I think this is great if everybody else can use it. So then we go into that evaluation too.
And so from your perspective, what's like an ideal way of making a purchase or making a decision on a purchase? Like, do you think about it? Oh, I want to go talk to somebody and really have a deep dive conversation and a POC for a month, or is that changing, or has it not changed?
Yeah, so I think it will depend on the product that we are buying. Let's say um, I'm buying a database that one of us has experience with, and we know that it is the right use case for us. Then we would try to short circuit that process as much as possible. And like we know that these are the only two vendors we need to talk to.
Hmm.
If we are trying to go into like a new market where we are saying, hey, let's find a new age, let's say logging vendor or new age observability vendor, then we have to really go and do deep dives with their sales and SC teams to understand why are they different, how will they help us solve the problem, will they actually save us money, or it's going to go the other way around, etc. As obviously time evolves, people have experience with different things. So we would just like, how can I try that as fast as possible? Is it available via AWS Marketplace? I don't have to talk to anybody. So that's like the most ideal scenario. But if not, then yes, running a sales cycle is fine.
So let's talk about what everybody's talking about for last 1 year now. It's the last section of this topic. Gen AI, how is that changing the both the development and deployment process? Like, I'm sure, or maybe I'm not sure, but have a lot of people started using GitHub Copilot or PyCharm if you're using that IDE to generate code? And how is that changing how fast you ship, the quality of the code? How is that changing, and where do you see that going in the
We
future?
are we are definitely in the evaluation process right now. A couple of engineering leaders are taking that mantle, and we want to improve developer productivity and you know figure out the right way to like ship and increase our velocity. So uh, we are also looking at vendors to like do the whole SDLC cycle, right? I mean, I think GitHub Copilot is a great example. We already have using GitHub, so we can add the licenses. So we are testing that out to see.
How do you find the quality of the code currently coming out of GitHub Copilot?
Um, I cannot speak to it much right now because I'm not that involved. Somebody
Sure.
else is. But I've heard good things in general from people who have tried it out, and that's why we are investing our time. I think this year is going to be where we actually get it deployed as fast as possible and improve the time it takes to ship something.
Do you think it'll change the process or the way you ship stuff in any way?
I think it will change, the definitely the boilerplate stuff. It will help people write tests better, things that they don't think about. Maybe the code can give you a better idea of what else you could be testing, what are the edge cases, um, and hopefully we can also inform the AI about like how we would like to write code, and it can help the developer adhere to a particular standard. and make sure that now code can be readable across the whole company, and not just by the three people who wrote it.
And from your end customer perspective, do you see a lot of asks or requests from your customers about Gen AI capabilities, or do you see that change in pattern of how they currently use your product like 6Sense, or even how they do their business?
Yeah, so what is important for our customers, the 6Sense gives them the right insight and gives them the insight very quickly.
Hmm.
So we are, you know, we have a lot of different products where people come in and like they infer the data from what we're showing. Now it is our responsibility to help them do that faster. So now we are bringing in Gen AI to give them the right summary, to help them to ask questions of the data right from within the product without having to, think about it more or like open a support ticket or like ask their CSM, right? We want them to interact with AI to say,
Mhm.
hey, I look at this company or look at this segment of companies. This is what I see. What is the meaning of this? Or what can I do next? What is the right channel that I should activate based on what you are showing me. So customers are, looking forward for ways where we can make their lives easier.
So, from your perspective, somebody that has a very vested interest in the data itself, because that's what powers the company and the product. Like, how do you think about the value of data? Like, for you, what is more valuable? Is it data that just was born right now, or data that was a year old? So, recency of data. The second could be around the kind of data it is. The third is how accessible, or accessible as in, can you access it through SQL, JSON, and other stuff? Like, how do you think about that changing the value of data? Like, first of all, like, how do you think about what is the value of data, and how do you see that changing with Gen AI, if at all in any way?
Yeah, so we put a lot of value on like historical data because that's what the machine needs to know to understand the trends that have happened in the past so that it can inform the future and help you do more better things in the future. So, for example, your past historical website visitation
Mm.
data, like what are people doing on your website, right? What are they clicking on? What are the high value pages? Does that lead to converting into an opportunity? Um, when you open opportunities, what are you doing with them? The opportunity history. So, when we are onboarding customers, we are trying to get as much as historical data from them. And then obviously the third party vendors are sending us historical data so we can like help the customer immediately with the value of like historical data that we have collected. And then as new data is coming in real time, as people are visiting their website, we can like immediately tell them who it is, how they can act with that particular visitor. So all data is important, right? We have static data like your CRM accounts and leads and contacts, but
Yeah.
then all your intent data that is coming in, advertising data, third party intent data from like big and small partners. So it's a big, data lake. When I heard that uh, word the first time, like, oh, yeah, we do have a data lake, and we have to now manage it to make sure it does not. Oh,
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting because I've been thinking about similarly what you just said. So, just to paraphrase, or at least the way I understand it, what you're saying is the richness and the volume of data is primarily important. Like, if you just had very scanty data about somebody, then that's not very useful. So you want to have the richness and the volume. And then on top of that, you want to have the recency of the data. Like, what did that person just do, which gives me the intent? Is that a fair
yeah,
understanding?
exactly right. If you're a very new company, you don't have enough opportunities, you don't have enough accounts to go after, then you would not be able to use certain part of a product. You would not The machine learning piece would not be the best thing for you. You should do something else with, right? But if you have a lot of historical data, then we can derive better insights. We also have ways to like fill in the blanks and like infer things based on what we have seen across our customer base to help someone who does not have enough, it will only go so far.
When you think about generative AI or large language model, are you thinking about using it within your own engineering process as well, like around your data? Like, do you ever think, oh, because we have 10 petabytes of data, we should eventually have our own large language model? Or do you think about, no, I'm going to use this with an existing OpenAI or something like that, and then embellish that data and use it for something different? Like, have you started thinking about that in any ways?
Yeah, it's more of the latter. Our data science team does a lot of experiments with the external systems like OpenAI, Llama, etc. And now there are so many options available in the market to like run LLMs in the cloud, and like they will host multiple layers. So we just don't want to take on that time and effort and the cost to like figure out what to do with RAG, helping improve the quality of the output. uh, we are just like doing a lot of experiments to see what is the best tool to use out there to solve a problem that we have.
And do you personally or from your team, do you have a verdict on which model is still the best, like between open sources as well as commercial ones?
I think we are still seeing OpenAI's model be like the best for most of our use cases.
That's what I keep hearing from others
Yeah.
as well. It's not just the quality, I think it's just the whole product, the quality of the product, like the features they add and how quickly they add, and
Mhm.
just the quality of results that come back. That's pretty interesting. But you mentioned you looked at Llama too, like the 70 billion model as well.
I think so. Yeah, the team experimented, and then we were figuring out, okay, now we have to how do we deploy it and how do we make sure it runs at scale? And then like, okay, it's OpenAI is giving similar or better results. The cost might actually be the same or even less. Let's just like go with that. And if things go out of hand, we'll keep doing things in the background to understand what else can we use. We'll always have like a backup ready, right? OpenAI thankfully did not implode with all that craziness that happened a few months ago, but that's something we have to be ready for, right? If their pricing model changes or the quality of the output changes, like we always should have something else that can like step in.
Yeah, I mean that's where I feel where the world is headed. It's pretty interesting in terms of how we went from monolithic to microservices. I see that a lot of this is moving towards agent oriented, with agent being you have access to one large language model, and you have your own knowledge or your own data source, and then you have your own tools. So then you have one agent that is specialized for doing something, because just like you were saying earlier, it has its own depth of knowledge, but also the recency of data that is coming in. So it's I'm particularly very interested to see where that goes. But since you mentioned RAG, this probably would be the last question. Um, how do you see that? Like, do you have plans of using vector semantic search, and do you have plans of evaluating how to change or evolve your architecture to accommodate for or to be ready for RAG?
So one of the things that we are like, we already have we create a Slack bot for our support team. So when a customer asks a question, support team will ask the bot the question, which will do
Nice.
a RAG search on like the content that they have
Yeah.
created and
Knowledge
give
base.
them the answers along with few links, and we give it to the customer. So that's just the internal testing. But eventually, the phase is the customer actually has access to it, right?
Mhm.
All our internal teams, SCs, CSMs, but now even the customer can ask questions instead of opening support tickets, right? And that comes from all the knowledge base that not only we add to what we call the Rev City, which is our knowledge base, but also every other customer who is adding knowledge to it. So it's coming from our own data set, but it's answering the question right way.
So are you using vectors for that, I'm assuming?
Yes.
And
Yes.
where are you storing those vectors? How are you creating those
Yeah,
images?
so thankfully we have single store, so we just did not have to
Oh,
procure anything else, right?
oh.
We started experimenting. And I don't think we have still gone to the latest 8.5 ANN, but they're using 8.1 somewhere and uh, getting the right results and like vectorizing and asking, then sending it to OpenAI.
Just to be clear, I was not aware that single store was it, but I was hoping that you knew that
Oh yeah,
it has vectors and you can do mix and match of data right in one SQL statement.
yes.
So, and the other nice piece is it has pipelines that can bring in your existing incidents and issues and vectorize it and put it into the knowledge base as well.
Oh, okay.
So when somebody's asking, you have the freshest of data. Like if there's a incident going on, you're able to tell them, oh, by the way, tell the customer that there's this currently going on, and you can answer questions related to
We will look into that.
that. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Premal. I've learned so much. Couple of quick questions, and then we can end the show. What's your favorite code editor? Is it VS Code? Is it Vim?
Oh, I'm
Or
a JetBrains Java IDE, which has a Python plugin, so like I can do everything in there.
PyCharm and
Yeah,
WebStorm, the whole
yeah,
JetBrains? Okay.
yeah, yeah. So luckily the Java editor now has Python plugin, so I don't need to open both.
Oh, nice.
That's been around for like maybe a couple of years. So I do all my editing in there: Java code, Python code, SQL.
And JetBrains, I saw that they also added like the AI feature, very similar to Copilot.
Yeah,
But
I've
you
not
have to-
used that yet. Fortunately, I don't have to do a lot of coding these days, but I'm just like reviewing code. I'm looking at stuff. It's called IntelliJ. The name came.
I see. Okay. Second question is, if you were to tell somebody in school, in college, what to focus on when coming into an engineering job today or even 2 years from now, what are the three things you would tell that kid to know and learn and be really good at?
Uh, I would say being a kind of like a full stack person is pretty important these days. You should be able to understand the concepts of like data and storage and like, at least the basics. Like have a backing database to build an application on top of it, able to write some backend APIs, backend code, and then build a decent looking UI on top of it. That actually gives you an idea of like what is involved end to end in like building an application. This is just again a web application, right? There obviously you can do mobile and this and that, um, but versus being just focused on I only do X versus Y. You need the versatility. A lot of employers are looking for that, um, and it also helps you personally. You can be independent. You can be the person that people can go to and say, "Hey, I need to build the full cycle." You're the person behind it. I think these days it's probably important to understand, what's happening in the AI world, and at least being able to experiment and play around with it a little bit. I'm sure a lot of tools are available for people to try out, to write code, to do shopping lists or do like planning an itinerary. So being familiar with what's happening in the world with like the new age technology.
Very good. And then last question, what do you like to do most outside of work?
A lot of decompression, hanging out with the kids, um, watching some TV shows, watching sports. Um, Sometimes go and hit up the go-karting track.
Very good. Well, thank you so much, Premal. I think this was phenomenal. I've learned so much. I'm going to go back and then take some notes because there were some really good nuggets out of that. But really appreciate it. And like I said, genuinely, I love the product and what you folks are doing. So looking forward and rooting for you.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All
Yeah,
right.
and we love your product too.
All right. Thank you.